The Holy Gospel, according to Mark. Glory to you, Lord. King Herod heard of it, for Jesus' name had become known. Some were saying, John the Baptizer has been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work in him. But others said, it is Elijah. And others said, it is a prophet, like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard of it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. For Herod himself had sent men who arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod had married her. For John had been telling Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to kill him, but she could not. For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he protected him. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he liked to listen to him. But an opportunity came when Herod on his birthday gave a banquet for his courtiers and officers, and for the leaders of Galilee. When his daughter Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests, and the king said to the girl, ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it to you. And he solemnly swore to her, whatever you ask me, I will give you, even half of my kingdom. She went out and said to her mother, what should I ask for? She replied, the head of John the Baptizer. Immediately she rushed back to the king and requested, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. The king was deeply grieved, yet out of regard for his oaths and for his guests, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately he sent a soldier of the guard with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in the prison, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl. Then the girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard about it, they came and took his body, and they laid it in a tomb. The Gospel of our Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. As you can imagine, this is a story that a lot of pastors shy away from. I'll admit I struggled a bit with this story this week. Pastor Kim has been gracious enough to invite me to her text study group that meets on Wednesdays, and I lamented to the group that I didn't have a clear direction for the story, and that maybe I would just take the easy way out and preach on Ephesians, the other lesson for the week. But then some inspiration came from an unexpected source. The FX channel has been playing the most recent Spider-Man trilogy, and I found myself watching Spider-Man No Way Home. I mean, what better way to spend your time when you have a sermon to write and you have classes to study for and homework that's due this weekend than to watch a 2.5-hour movie. If you're a fan of Spider-Man, you know that there's a quotable quote that comes out of that movie. The quote is, with great power comes great responsibility. It's advice that Peter Parker, who of course is Spider-Man's secret identity, gets from his Uncle Ben in the movie. The quote, with great power comes great responsibility, actually comes from ancient sources, including the Bible verse that says, from everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded, and from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. I wish I could say that was the inspiration for my sermon, but it is Spider-Man. And whether you are a fan of Spider-Man or not, Spider-Man finds, like all of us, that there are times in our lives when we feel and we have power. And there are times in our lives when we feel powerless. And there are times in our lives when we have power, but we fail to use it to do the right thing. Of course, the amazing Spider-Man has power beyond our wildest dreams. He can shoot webs, fly through the air, climb walls, fight the most powerful of evil villains. And yet sometimes in the movies, he doesn't have the power to save the people that he loves the most. Spider-Man's story is a mix of power and powerlessness. In her book, Power, A User's Guide, Julie Diamond writes about an experience of power and powerlessness. As a student teacher back in the 70s, she discovered what many hopeful new teachers find, that even after completing all of the coursework for your degree to become a teacher, she still had to earn the respect of all of her students. And as any teacher discovers, there are days in the classroom where you feel powerful and you connect with your students and they learn and they grow. And there are days as a teacher when, despite your best efforts, you feel powerless. There are days you just don't connect with your students. And there are days that the students just don't get the information that you've tried so hard to convey to them. At the end of Julie Diamond's 3 months of student teaching, she received some feedback from her students. As she went through the feedback forms, she found she received a lot of nice feedback from her students about her friendly and open style of teaching. But then she came across some feedback from a student, and she said it was like a punch in the stomach. The student wrote, "I think you played favorites." The problem for Julie is that she knew who the student was that wrote the comment. It was from one of the only 2 black girls in her class and in the whole school. She said the girls rarely participated in class. She couldn't figure out how to engage with them. She was at a loss. She said she did something that continues to make her feel ashamed. She did nothing. She didn't ask for help from the other teachers. She didn't try to connect with the students privately or offer her support. She said she knew things were pretty bad in terms of racial equity back in the 70s, and she knew how hard things must have been for those 2 girls. She felt like she should have done something, but she didn't. She was caught off guard by her feelings of inadequacy, her feelings of weakness, and she didn't challenge herself to put her students' needs before her own feelings. Julie reflects in her book that we can easily see the actions of a Hitler or a Stalin, the corruption of politicians, or institutions that cover up their injustices as an abuse of power. But she writes that the average person can misuse or even abuse power in ways that can have lasting effects on others. In our gospel lesson for this morning, there's a mix of power and powerlessness for each of the characters in our story. Of course, there's Herod. He is the ruler of all of the people in the story. We would assume that he has the most power. He has the power to call the shots. He has the power to have John arrested, to throw him in prison, and ultimately either to spare him or to have him put to death. And yet Herod, too, finds himself in a place of powerlessness. Sometimes it's because of his fear that the feeling if he makes the right choice by sparing life, it will not go well for him as a leader. Herod's afraid of John the Baptist. Herod knew John was a holy and righteous man, so Herod did all that he could to protect John. Herod enjoys listening to John, and so he's deeply grieved when his daughter calls for him to be killed. He feels powerless to save John because he made an oath in front of powerful guests, and he doesn't want to go back on his oath. In Herod's day and time, it was not easy to take back an oath. The Jewish people of the day saw going back on an oath as equal to the offense of taking God's name in vain. Even as the leader in this story, Herod had moments where he felt powerless. John the Baptist has power in this story. He's an agent of God. He's the one that at the beginning of Mark's gospel is sent to prepare the way for Jesus. At the beginning of Mark's gospel, the gospel writer states that people from the whole Judean countryside and all the people of Jerusalem were going out to John and were baptized by him in the river Jordan, confessing their sins. That's a lot of power. We know that John holds power over Herod, who fears him. Again, Herod liked to listen to John speak. Being liked by a powerful ruler holds power. But John called out Herod for marrying his brother's wife. And as professor of biblical studies Emerson Powery writes, one thing is certain: agents of God who challenge those in power usually suffer significant consequences. The king's daughter has the power to ask Herod for whatever she wants, even half of his whole kingdom. That's power. And yet she probably feels powerless in the face of her mother's horrible request for John the Baptist. Even the daughter of the queen knows not to question the queen's request, no matter how awful it might seem. Perhaps Herodias, the wife of Herod, has the most power in the story. She gets her way in the end. She's the one who wanted John silenced in the first place. And yet maybe she too felt powerless in her own way. Maybe the voice of John echoed in her head, telling her that her marriage was unlawful, making her feel guilty. Maybe she couldn't sleep at night because she worried about what people thought of her because of what John said. Maybe, just maybe, if she could get rid of John and that voice, her life would be better. Maybe she could sleep again. Maybe her conscience wouldn't bother her. And maybe people would stop judging her in her powerlessness to get over her grudge against John. She has him killed. Perhaps that's power and powerlessness all rolled into one. And I think it's easy to judge those in power, whether it's our politicians, our corporate leaders, or the most wealthy people in the world. We often wish they would do more for others. At the very least, make choices that are ethically and morally sound. But one of the things that this lesson reminds us is that we all have some power. We all have choices that we can make that affects the lives of others. As Julie Diamond reminds us, the average person can misuse power in ways that can have a lasting effect on others. And I think we all understand that there are times in our lives when we have turned aside from using maybe even the little power we felt we had to make the right choice. Maybe it was our feelings of powerlessness or our fear that kept us from making the right choice. But we all have some power to make this world a better place. For the rest of Mark's gospel, we will journey without the presence of John. Jesus will move back to center stage in our stories once again. That's the way John would have wanted it. It was John's mission to point to Jesus. And Jesus will always use his power to demonstrate God's love for the world, including us, as we struggle to confront our feelings of powerlessness and fear, as we try to use the power that we have to help others in our lives. And in those moments of power and powerlessness, in those moments when we struggle to make the right decision, in those moments when we might even doubt God's love is for us because of the decisions that we make, Jesus will lay down his life for us to remind us of the unconditional commitment of God's love for all people. Jesus has the power to do that.